Upon the eve of Adam, deity rang an anthem, sang an album, banged a bass drum, for his love had begun. The heavens took aim at loneliness, hate, selfishness, and shame. His hands became the battle lines by creating planets for his Valentine. He presented her with gardens of flowers, mountainous towers of cards, glistening seas of treats, and their date took place under the shade of the second night stars. The garden wrapped with leaf and vine, the seventh day, first Valentines. Then the lover penned a love note, opened his ominous throat. He wrote transcendent quotes that descended upon Sinai's mountain. This letter spoke of what the heavens saw, how the Creator stood in awe of creation. Raw revelation rested on humanity, flaws and all. The law was scrawled out in draw vows. The lover's keeper of elated emotions ran deeper than his created oceans, better than nature's wine. The law, love's first written Valentine. But his creation's devotion soon sank with the weight of their inflated notions. They berated his holiness by degrading the homeless, parading their boldness, trading the memo of Moses for a new soulless Pharaoh. Their own kings, their own law, their own things, their own gods. They broke the author's heart by building shrines to what were meant to serve as signs to the designer, not the design. His creation fell in love with creation's Valentine. The lover tried to win back his bride. He bribed her when he described his love through his prophets, emptied his pockets of profits and punishment, sent more messengers than they could murder to prove his fervor and commitment. But his love was met with nothing but fervent resistance. No matter how hard he tried, they would always decline his love-littered Valentine. But the lover was resigned to restore his creation's design. He declined sending any more lofty letters or mystical messages. He was inclined to heal Earth's damages by leaving his palace to deliver cordate packages. The lover descended on his creation, practicing his previous letters, hand-delivering notes to the poor, blind, and lepers, exposing the gloats of common temple dwellers, explaining how giving up your cloak is a godlike gesture, examining the hope found in forgiving your debtors, redefining your treasures, surrendering your pleasures, revealing that he was the sender of those ancient ancestral letters. Then he composed one more note of love. He showed it not from on high, but with lowly blood. The lover wrote of how much his love had cost. His pen was flesh-dipped nails, his paper was a cross. On the feast of his offering, he called creation to dine, receive peace through his suffering, the last Valentine. Now that I have penned mine, I pass the ink to you to create as the Creator love notes with what you do. Send them to family and to enemies too. Write out loud to those in poverty whom others see through. Use your own flesh's ink to keep the message true, and wear the lover's letters like a tattered tattoo. With an eternity of messages from our love-struck divine, may we go forth into forever, his valiant Valentines.
When God writes the story, it's filled with surprises.
Forgotten people get chosen and underdogs win battles.
True friends share a journey. Lessons are learned in the wilderness.
The guilty are set free, and a middle schooler takes out a giant.
David is probably the most well-liked character in the Old Testament.
We all know someone named David, a relative or a friend.
At Crossroads, we have 23 Davids. King David is who made that name popular.
David was a skilled musician, a lover of the law, and led thousands in combat as a warrior.
He was strong and brave, but he also had another side.
He was a writer, a poet, and a skilled statesman.
Israel reached its highest economic and political stability in its history under David.
He's the central character in the kingdom era of the Old Testament.
Abraham, Father Abraham, had 14 chapters written about him.
Elijah the prophet had 10.
David had 66.
He's mentioned 600 times in the Old Testament and 60 in the New Testament.
He's the last person named in the Bible. In Revelation 22:16, Jesus said, "I am the root and descendant of David, the bright and morning star."
He's pretty great, but also incredibly human.
He commits adultery and is an accomplice to murder.
He neglects to correct his own children, and his son even tried to kill him once.
If you think you have family issues, David can relate.
He was very sinful at times.
And still became one of the most remarkable people to ever walk the earth.
How?
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 This is the story of David.
All right, we are in it. Last week, if you were here at the Super Bowl of preaching, we talked about and we started the story of David. It was the time when Israel had no king. They were following God, and then they said, no, we want a king anyway. And God said, that's a terrible idea. And they said, well, we still want one. And so they got a king that looked just like the heart of man. He was broken and corrupted. His name was Saul. And then God set up and anointed another king. His name is David, who instead of having a heart like man, says that he was a heart that chased after God. And so David, at that point, if you were here last week, you know this, he's anointed king when he is very young and then goes right back into the wilderness where he spends 20 to 25 years hanging out with sheep, learning, growing, being developed before he ever steps on to the throne. It's pretty amazing. And so today what I want to look at, most of our series is not going to really focus on his time on the throne. We'll talk about that one week, but it's really kind of the time before and after. And so today we're going to look at the most famous story of the young life of David. You saw it, no doubt, when you were a kid. Maybe some of y'all are old enough to have done it on felt boards. Others of you learned about it from the Veggie Tales. We are today talking about David and the giant pickle. Who's with me, okay? Somebody know what I'm talking about? David and Goliath. What kind of name is like? What kind of parent do you have to be to name your kid Goliath? That was not a small child, probably a 12-pound at birth. I mean, like, this is a big dude, Goliath. That's an intimidating name. See, here's the deal I want us to get as we go into this story. We all face giants. Every single one of us. Whether that's debt, health issues, kids that are on a dangerous path, loneliness, work, age, anger, the sin that has marked and scarred your life, or the spiritual battle that you're facing, we all face giants. And you got two options. You can ignore them, or you can face those suckers. But that's scary, isn't it? Like, facing giants is a little bit scary. I have a friend of mine, he's a pastor up in Ohio, and he always told this story about fear. It was him and his daughter in the car, and his daughter goes, "Hey, Daddy, are you afraid of spiders?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "Daddy, are you afraid of robbers?" And he said, "No." He said, "Daddy, are you afraid of thunder or ghosts?" And he goes, "No." And his daughter went, "So it's just mommy? That's it? That's the only thing you're afraid of?" If you're married or you're a parent, you know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? That's funny. I don't care who you are. Listen, we're all afraid of something. The most common fears out there, spiders, snakes, heights, storms, and then this one's personal for me, clowns. That's just creepy. I don't know why, but I don't know if it was Stephen King to blame or somebody, but man, I am not big on clowns. And then there's some weird fears out there. Anybody want to know what nomophobia is? This is a legit thing. I'm not making it up. Nomophobia is the fear of being without your cell phone. That's what NOMO stands for, no mobile. The fear of being without your cell phone. And you go, well, that's dumb, but how many of you have ever had that moment where you get in the car or you go somewhere and you go, and you realize that you don't have it with that, you got some nomophobia, okay? Anybody know what phobophobia is? Phobophobia is the fear of having phobias. That's some Inception type stuff right there, okay? And then here's one that I know we as a church want to apologize, because some of you, we may have triggered something in you last week at the Super Bowl of preaching, because there is a fear called choreophobia. It is short for the word choreography. It is the fear of dancing. And so we apologize if that just really got on somebody last week when we started dancing. It was crazy. But we all have fears. And let me tell you what, if fears cripple us, they paralyze us, they make us miserable. If you're not careful, they'll wreck your future. So today we want to look at fear, and we want to look at how to overcome fear and face our giants. And so in there this morning, I know we got a small crowd, but I'm going to need you to be chatty. You can be talkative, even if you go, like that keeps me going faster, gets you out of here quicker. That's all I can tell you. If you're online, and we want that from you, post comments, things that you like. We want to keep everybody active this morning in a little bit different setting. So let's start with this. Let's do a self-assessment. Are you living in fear? Now that'll trigger some stuff, right? That's been asked a lot over the last year. Are you living in fear? You got people that say faith over fear, all those kind of questions. And can I tell you, there is a difference between having fear and being imprisoned by it. And we need to make sure we understand those differences. Like there are certain things that it's natural for you to have normal fear. If I have a little child that runs into the street, fear rises up in me. That's not ungodly. That's normal. That's human. That's practical. If I know that we live in a pandemic and there's a part of me that goes, man, I really hope that doesn't happen to me or my family, that is a normal thought. However, to be imprisoned to that fear and to elevate that fear to a place where it is more powerful than the faith in your life is sin. And so there's a difference in these things. It's no different than anxiety. Anxiety is something that is human to have. It is a sin to be imprisoned by. And so we want to make sure that we never put anything on a higher level of power and presence than God. And so here's the thing. Here's how I self-assess. Ask yourself this question this morning. In your life right now, are you more focused on your problems than on God? See, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, in the story, that's what you're going to find. An entire nation is living in fear, only focused on their problems. I'll start in verse 4. It says, then a champion named Goliath from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 foot 9 inches tall. He wore a bronze helmet and a bronze scale armor that weighed 125 pounds. There was bronze armor on his shins. He had a bronze javelin swung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam. The iron point of the spear weighed 15 pounds. In addition, a shield bearer was walking in front of him. Now, that could have been two things. It could have been a person in front of him holding a shield, but more likely in their culture, that was indicating a full-size head-to-toe shield that he was holding with one of his arms that probably weighed 75, 80, 100 pounds. Like it could have been that. Either way, here's the deal. Verse 8, he stood and shouted to the Israelites' battle formation. Why do you come out and line up in battle formation, he asked them. Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of Saul? Choose one of your men and have him come down against me. If he wins in a fight against me and kills me, we will be your servants. But if I win against him and kill him, then you be our servants. And then the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel today. Send me a man so we can fight each other. So that's the definition of a problem. They've got a problem literally facing them down. Let me give you a little bit of background. By the way, can I just say this? Isn't it amazing how you can go back to a story that you've heard 1 billion times and God can still teach you stuff? That's what I experienced going through this. So let me tell you a few things. First of all, let's talk about Goliath. First thing that I learned, and never in 45 years, 25 years of ministry, did not ever look into this. Goliath's not a name. It's a title. In Hebrew, it's a title that actually means magician or supernatural. Like it's the idea of giving this guy a title that makes him feel larger than life, which is weird. Like he's like a Marvel character. That's how they're kind of trying to set him up. It's weird that they're trying to make him larger than life because in life, he's 9 foot 9 inches tall. He doesn't need to be much taller. You might go like, is that even realistic? Well, first of all, it'd be amazing, right? Like if you get that guy to play center for the Dallas Mavericks, we'd win some games. But like if you go, is that real? Is that something that happened? Well, he's descended from a race of people called the Anakim. And the Anakim were a race of tall people. If you go like, well, it's probably one of those things that's just in the Bible and nobody else talks about. No, it's not true. Historically, the Bible talks about it, the Babylonians talked about it, and the Greeks talked about the Anakim race. He has superior weaponry. This guy is, in our modern language, packing some serious heat. He's got some stuff, and he's got all kinds of armor. This dude is literally a walking tank. On the other side, Dave. Little Dave from a podunk city of Bethlehem. He's the runt of his 8 brothers, the smallest. He's about 13 at this time. He's got no previous military battle experience, and he comes into the battle with leather and pebbles. Who'd you bet on? I mean, like, seriously, if this was set up in Vegas, if you did take David, you'd win a ton because everybody's going to bet against. See, the thing is, when you have a giant-sized problem and that's all you can focus on, you will begin to believe that there is no solution. And when that happens, here's the next thing I want you to assess in yourself, is you start to expect defeat. Like, are you walking through life right now just going, I expect this to go badly. I expect today to be terrible. I expect everything bad to happen. Like, I just expect it to happen. See, that's what you find. In verse 11, here's what it says. When Saul and all of Israel heard the words from the Philistine, here's what happened. They lost their courage and were terrified. They haven't fought. They haven't walked out to meet him in battle, and they're not making any plans to do anything. They are simply looking at only the problem and expecting defeat. You know what happens in that moment? You push courage to the side, and you only focus on self-protection. It doesn't go well. Verse 16 says this, every morning and evening. Listen, I want you to listen to how long they sidelined themselves in a battle. Every morning and evening for 40 days. This isn't a couple of days, it isn't a week, for 40 days, for over a month. Twice a day he comes out and goes, anybody? No? Okay. He comes back in the evening. Anybody? No? Okay. These guys hide in a tent. They are completely focused on the problem and they are expecting to lose. And then something happens. See, David's not at the battle at this point. He's back at home tending sheep, and his dad sends him occasionally to the battle to go take some food to his brothers. And so God kind of speaks to this moment. It's really cool. And so Jesse decides on this particular day to send his son David with some bread and cheese. That's queso is biblical. Like it's in the Bible. He goes on a cheese run. And so he goes on a cheese run to go and see his brothers. And here's what happens. So David gets there, and this is what happened in verse 23. While he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward. This is what he's done over and over again, from the Philistine battle line, and shouted his usual words. But this time something happened. David heard. Verse 24, when all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they still are in this posture. They retreated and were terrified. See, we're going to get to David's response in a minute, but just look at this. Right now, they're paralyzed. They've stopped. Don't miss this, because this is what I've always missed in the story. They actually stopped living for what mattered more. See, we get so focused on this little guy and the giant. What about all the other guys that refused to engage in the fight that God had called them to? They stopped living for what mattered most. You know what they should have been focused on? Not the giant. They should have been focused on the country they were there to defend. They should have been focused on the families that they were there to protect. They should have been focused on the faith that they were there to push forward. They should have been focused on the things they were supposed to live for. As a matter of fact, this is a pivotal battle. That's another thing I'd never researched. I'd always looked at the little kid and the giant, but I never asked myself, was this whole battle, significant at all? So looked into it. One historian described it this way. I thought this was amazing. Don't miss this. One historian said this battle between David and Goliath may have been the single most important battle fought in human history. Sounds like an overstatement. There's been some really significant battles fought. Why would he say that? Here's why he said it. At this moment, the people of Israel are the single group of people that are holding on to the values that you and I hold on to today. They are the only group of people on the planet that are holding on to something like monotheism, worshiping the one true God. That's what they're there to fight for. Israel's fear caused them to stop living for what actually mattered. It's not like they were sitting in their tents planning for how to attack. They're living in fear, overwhelmed by the problem. See, you don't have to live this way. Now, here's the problem with this message. If I stopped right here and just went, you can do it, like it sounds like a Tony Robbins seminar. Like this is the power of positive thinking. And don't get me wrong, there is positive thinking in the story of David and Goliath, but the positive thinker in the story of David and Goliath isn't David. Think about the story. Who's the one person in the story that is consistently going, I believe that I can find victory no matter what? Who is it? Goliath. Goliath's the guy with positive thinking in the story. He believes he can take on any enemy. He believes that he can find victory in any situation. Send me your best. I've got this thing won. That is the thing. But here, don't miss this. This is critical as we turn the corner on this message today. There is a huge difference between the power of positive thinking and the power of positive faith. See, David is not running into battle going, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. David runs into battle going, I know God can. That is a huge difference. And so what I want to do today is I want to say, how do you develop the power of positive faith to face the giant in your life? See, and here's the thing. The way God worked then is the way God works. Anybody want to guess? Let's say it again. The way God worked then is the way God works Absolutely. And so here's what we need to know. What happened then? David in verse 26. I love this. He's heard what's happened. Here's David's response. He says, what's going to be done for this man who kills the Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And then I love it. Who is this pagan? Who's this guy coming up again? Like, who does he think he is? I'm just paraphrasing that for those of you that aren't looking at your scripture. He says, who is this pagan, this Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? See, here's the first step to positive faith. Compare the size of whatever giant you're facing to the size and power of God. David is the only person with an accurate assessment of Goliath. He says, Goliath is nothing compared to my God. Here's what he says. He says, you come at me with a sword and spear. This is what he's looking at, a 9-foot 9-inch giant. This is a middle schooler. So don't tell me middle schoolers can't make an impact in the kingdom of God. Okay? He goes, you come at me with a sword, spear, and javelin. I come at you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. You have defied him, and today the Lord will hand you over to me. If David had had a mic, he would have dropped it right then. It's amazing. He looks at Goliath. He goes, Goliath, let me introduce you to the giant in my corner. We call him God, Sparky. He's bigger than you. I remember when I was growing up, I don't know how many of you guys have an older sibling. I have an older brother. And there's a rule, I've never been the older brother, but if you are an older sibling, there seems to be a rule. And here's the rule. I can pick on my younger siblings, but nobody else can. Okay, I don't know if you've experienced that rule. So that was true in my house. My brother loved to pick on me, but he didn't like anybody else to do it. I was in elementary school, and I grew up in kind of a rough area. And I had this moment where I had a guy that periodically would just show up in my life, and we became friends later on. This story ends well, but at this moment in elementary school, he would pick on me pretty relentlessly, and he always wanted to fight me. And so we got to a moment where I couldn't avoid the fight anymore. We had this moment, if you were a kid in the 80s, then there was a certain way you started a fight, and that was that you touched shoulders and you walked in a circle and you trash talked each other. Now, I knew how to do that part, but I'll be honest with you, at that time in my life, I had virtually no fighting skills whatsoever. And I was terrified because this guy was a couple of years older than me, and I was like, I'm about to get my butt whooped. And so I start walking in circles, and all of a sudden, I notice he stops. And the only thing I noticed different was there was a larger hand on his shoulder. I didn't see who it was at first, and that large hand spun him around, and it was my older brother, Eric. And my brother looked at him and said, do not ever touch my brother again. And he did not. See, here's the truth that you learn from David and from a story like that. We have to acknowledge that we need a power greater than ourselves, and only God can provide it. We need something stronger than us. See, compare the size of your giant with the size and power of God. But here's the next thing, and I don't want you to miss this, because you would think David is doing something great, it's going to be received well. The next point I have for you is get ready for criticism. The moment that you say, I'm going to do something courageous that God's called me to do, expect critics. David is about to do something humble, servant-oriented, and courageous, and he is immediately hammered by critics. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, if you've ever tried to do the right thing and got knocked down. So verbally, that's what's coming for David. The first one is his brother, Eliab. Eliab looks at him, and just listen to this kind of the cynicism and sarcasm in the text. It says, why did you come down here, he asked. Why did you leave those few sheep? Why does he have to use the word few? Why can't you just say sheep? He's almost got a mock, like, you ain't even watching that many sheep, and you think you're a big deal? Like, why you leave your few sheep in the wilderness? I know your arrogance and your evil heart, and you came down here to see the battle. Why would he be talking like this? Well, if you remember back to last week, which this is real recent in their life, Eliab is the firstborn of Jesse's sons, and he was passed over to be king. And to be honest, I don't think he's gotten over it. And can I tell you, a lot of unfair criticism comes from jealousy from other people. A lot of it. As a matter of fact, something that I will teach you that I learned and we counsel with all the time is criticism says more about the person doing the criticizing than it ever will about the person being criticized. See, the person that's throwing out criticism, what they're really telling you is that there's a void, a brokenness, a wound in their life. And so you have to just know that they're going to respond out of that. A lot of unfair criticism comes from jealousy, and that's what's happening here. And then Saul, the king, who David is coming to stand up for, decides to criticize. He goes, hey, you can't go fight this Philistine. You are just a youth. He's been a warrior since he was young. So he's going to criticize his experience. And then Goliath, the guy for 40 days who's been saying, send somebody to fight me, when somebody finally shows up, he says, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? He mocks that. See, here's the thing. Everybody's criticizing, and I love this, so I hope you get this. Everybody else is saying that Goliath is too big to beat. David is the only one going, guys, he's too big to miss. I can't miss him if I go up against it. I'm going to nail him. So how do you handle this criticism? I love this in David in verse 29. He says, what have I done now? Protested David when he's talking to these guys, especially his brother. It was just a question. And then look at this. Then he turned away. So he's talking to his critics, and they say something about him and his character. So he turns, and those beside him to others in front of him and asked him about the offer. So here's what happened. He goes, okay, you're saying this about my character. Let me go over here. I need a second opinion to see if this is true about me. I want to know if there is this void, if there is this blind spot that I'm not seeing. See, critique is good. This is how we talk about it on our staff. Critique is good. Criticism is bad. They can both sound very similar, but the intent, the heart behind critique is to tell you what you need to change in order to be better. And the idea of criticism for most people when they use it is to tell you what they think you need to hear in order to tear you down. And you don't want that. Don't allow criticism, the weight, to stop you from your courageous moments, because every courageous moment that you ever attempt to face will be met by criticism somewhere. And keep in mind, our battle is not with flesh and blood. No matter who is using it, Satan is the one that wants to keep you from fighting the battle God's called you to. And see, and can I just tell you, this is just a true thing about humanity. Not everybody's for you. Not everybody is for you. So you have to do some assessment. Matter of fact, does anybody in your life, do you know anybody that just constantly criticizes? No matter what? Like, there are people that I know in my life, like if Jesus had returned this morning, like if he had cracked open the sky, if you'd have had an incredible like rock band up there, I don't know, some people think trumpets, I think it's going to be a full band, and like the sound comes out and it's just epic 70s rock song, like it's just going to be and then Jesus descends, there would be people on our planet that would go, why is it going to come back on a snowy day? Like, it doesn't matter what happens, they got to criticize. That's just their heart. Don't give those people weight, but instead find some trusted godly friends and listen to them. Let me go on. Here's the next thing we see from the story is be who God made you to be. After they criticize, they go, well, you can't face him the way God's made you. Let's put you in our clothes. Let's make you do it our way. Saul tries to put him in his own armor. He tries to put a 13-year-old in a grown man's armor. And literally in the story, David goes, I can't walk in these. And so instead, he says, give me my staff, my stones, my sling. I'll do it that way. See, we have this issue. We try to become someone else. And if you try to be someone else, you'll never measure up. Ever. I tried to do that in my ministry for a long time when I was doing worship. I didn't know how to be Jason leading worship. I would be Jason that was imitating Chris Tomlin leading worship. Jason imitates Hillsong leading worship. And when I started preaching more often, you would go listen to people and you go, man, that guy's really good. How can I do my best impression of this person? And I had to settle into a reality that while I can learn from other people, God's called me to be me. And I need to be me the best way I can for him. And so David understands the same thing. Now, it looks silly because he's about to go fight Iron Man with rocks. It doesn't seem like a good plan, but here's the deal. God had developed him as a shepherd. Here's why I say that. Addison, my youngest daughter, when she first started playing soccer, she was not great at it. She was one of the bigger kids on the team, but she couldn't kick with any power. She just couldn't, and she would be kind of intimidated to get into traffic with other kids, and so they put her in this back defensive position when they're little. And when they're little, that's kind of like if you know anything about baseball, it is the equivalent of being stuck in right field. It is just this place that we go, we're going to put you back here and hope nobody goes towards you. But then Addie would go back in the backyard. She and I would go and we would work in the yard and we would kick and kick and kick and kick and kick and pass and kick and kick and pass and pass and kick. And we would work on stuff. And over time, it took a while. I would go from really easily kind of catching everything she would kick at me if I was pretending to be the goalie to trying to get out of the way because it hurt. She could bruise me, it would hurt my hands, and I was like, dang, she's put some power into this. And she moved from the position on the field that when she was little, they were trying to keep her as far away from the ball as possible into a position called striker, where she's the up front middle person attempting to score, and she could shoot well. What's the point of me telling you that story? What developed in the backyard eventually came out on the field. And that's what David is trying to tell them. In verse 34, it says, David answered Saul, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whether a lion or bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock. Now, if you were talking to me and I was a shepherd and you said, Jason, a lion or bear carried off a lamb for your flock, I would go, man, that's not good. But that's the end of my conversation. David, nope. Verse 35, I went after it. That is not a sentence you will ever say about me when it comes to a lion or a bear. He says, I went after it, struck it down, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared its head against me, I would grab it by its fur and strike it down and kill it. Verse 36, your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And then David said, verse 37, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hands of this Philistine. In other words, God's been preparing me in the backyard for what you're about to see on the field. I've learned to trust him. David had gained courage to face the larger giants in life by defeating smaller giants in his life. And I want to tell you, I think this is so important. Many of us don't celebrate small victories, and we need to. You know where Satan tries to stop most of everything you do? Is at the beginning. Because he knows if he can get you when it's small, if he can get you to believe that was not a big deal, that step was not that significant, then he can cut you off before you get to the big victories. If you want to see unbelievable things unfold in your life of faith, start to celebrate the small victories. You'll see them stack up and stack up and stack up, and you will see larger victories come in your life as well. It's important to celebrate those small things. See, here's the deal. To everyone else, it looks like David's at a huge disadvantage. But David had used a sling every day. Thought I'd try this because I'm not skilled at this, but I've got some candy up here, and I was trying to think of the best delivery method. So I ordered a sling on Amazon, and I want to show you the ability of a sling in the hand of an unskilled user. Uh-oh is right. Here we go. Yeah, there you go. All right. That was a Snickers, okay? Let me see if I can get one over here to this side over here. I'm going for y'all. Here we go. Here's a little miniature Snickers. Now, the problem is... Did you guys get that one over there? The problem is I can't aim. That's the problem. Let's try one more time. I got one more, and I promised you guys something. But I would just, based on previous experience, I'd keep your head on a swivel. So here we go. Let's try this again. Okay, that didn't work at all. Here's my point. Now, you wouldn't have to be scared if I was the one with a sling, but David had used one every day of his life. I actually looked this up. Do you know that a skilled slinger in those days could get a kill shot from 200 yards away? 2 football fields. Here's the thing. Goliath is built for close hand-to-hand combat. Don't miss this. Goliath is built for close hand-to-hand combat. He couldn't defend the attack that God had equipped David for. See, God knows your enemy, and he knows you better than you do. God and God alone can turn your disadvantages into advantages. I think about some people in our church that really kind of speak to this and that have impacted my life. I think about people like Alan and Linda Majors, and honestly, one of them sitting right here, Rusty and Karen Rae. Like many other people in our church, at one point, their marriage was at a disadvantage. And it was over. Divorce papers drawn up, the end was there. And then God stepped in and redeemed in a way that only God can redeem. And now they take that disadvantage and they use it to bless other people who are going through those moments. God's turned their disadvantage into an advantage. my good friend Mikey Hatson-Bueller, and then those of you guys that know Joanne Wagner, who is like, she's just Castro. Okay, so she's just unbelievable at, well, everything. They had a disadvantage in their life that they had caved into some serious addiction issues in their life. And God stepped in and God redeemed and restored in a way that only God can redeem and restore. And now they minister to other people who have those things. God turned their disadvantage into an advantage. I think about the Sizloves, the Childries, the Toziers, some of these folks who for years, some are still trying to have children. Others have by a miracle had a child. But for years they continued, even in the place where they were hurting and wounded, they continued to minister to other people's needs, encourage other people and lift them up. They knew what it was like to walk through those dark days, and God used their disadvantage as an advantage to bless others. Such an incredible, important thing to know what God can do in your life. Be who God made you to be. And the last thing I want to share with you is this: choose your battles wisely. Verse 46, this is, I love this. This is what David says to Goliath. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. Today I will strike you down. I will cut your head clean off, dude. That's not how it says it. That's how I wrote it. It says, I will remove your head. I like my version better. And give the corpse to the Philistine camp, to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. And then don't miss this. Here's the purpose. Here's the why. Why would he choose this battle? Why put himself in this position? It says, then all the world will know that Israel has a God. That's his why. See, our courage is proportional to our cause. If you tell me, like, Jason, hey, I would like to go to fight with you over a sandwich. Now, listen, I like sandwiches. But I'm not going to, I can go buy a sandwich. That ain't no big deal. But if you said, Jason, I'm coming after your wife, we're going to throw down. It's going to be ugly. Jason, I'm going to hurt your kids. No, you're not. And that same thing that wells up inside of us, that protective instinct, that desire for courageous things when they're connected to something, that's supposed to rise up in us to be the people willing to be in battle for our God, to fight for the cause of Christ. He says in verse 48, when the Philistine, this is my favorite verse in the whole part, and I'm about to be done. When the Philistine started forward to attack him, David ran quickly. Now, I'm going to go the rest in a minute, but I just want to pause there because I resonate with that sentence. If the Philistine had been running towards me into battle, I would have also ran quickly. The difference is the direction that we would have been running. I would have went, and then took off the other direction. But I want you to listen to what David did. David ran quickly to the battle. He ran to the battle line to meet the Philistine. And here's what I want you to get. You and I will never possess what we are unwilling to pursue. We have people in our church that go, I want to be more healthy. Well, that you don't just go to sleep and wake up and that's happened. There are people that go, I want to better myself financially and make smarter decisions. Well, listen, I know there are people who win the lottery, but it ain't going to be you, okay? That you're going to have to probably put some work in. It's not going to just magically occur. There are people that go, I want a better marriage. Then you're going to have to put some work in. You're going to have to run to the battle. There are people who go, I want a better relationship with God. I want to understand my Bible more. I want to have more spiritual friends. I want to get more connected at church. Don't misunderstand me. We want to help you do all those things, but the challenge for you is that it's actually first and foremost your responsibility to run into the battle. God is calling you to actually have the courage to run in and trust that when you run into the battle where you're supposed to be, that He's going to be there with you where you're supposed to be. That there's some giant that is in your life that God is calling you into the fight. You need to go into the fight and stand up for what God's called you to stand up for. We have too many in our culture, too many cowardly Christians when it comes to defending the things that actually matter most in our life. We need to run into battle. We need to put some effort in. We need to put a sense of urgency in. We need to fight for our homes, fight for our lives, our wives, our marriages, our kids, fight for our communities, fight for our church, fight for the cause of Christ. Run into battle. That's incredible for us to understand. You will never possess what you're willing to pursue. You need to pursue it. David took action, and so should we. And here's what I want you to see as it closes in verse 50. David overpowered the Philistine and killed him without having a sword. David ran and stood over him, and he grabbed the Philistine sword, and he pulled it from his sheath, and he used it to kill him, and then he cut off his head. Isn't this a great children's story? This screams kids, doesn't it? He cut off his head, and when the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they fled. Now, I want you to don't miss this, as we're almost done. I know I've gone over, but, you're all going to stay home today, so there's plenty of time. The men of Israel and Judah rallied. Don't miss this. Where have they been for 40 days? Afraid, hiding in tents, not fighting for what matters. And in the moment, the men of Israel and Judah rallied, shouting their battle cry, and chased the Philistines to the entrance of the valley and the gates of Ekron. See, facing the giants in your life helps others start to believe that they can too. What we need to do more is we need to talk about the giants that God has helped you defeat. We've all got them. But here's what we're convinced of. We're convinced that if you knew the bad stuff in my life that God said to help me overcome, you would somehow no longer love me. When in reality, the opposite is true. That when you hear and understand the battles that I've gone through and what God's done in my life, it actually increases your faith and belief that God can help you overcome yours. See, one of the greatest things that Satan wants to silence is our confession of our weaknesses to our brothers and sisters. Because if he can get you to be silent about how big God's moved, then he wins. The moment you start to say, here's what God is able to do, people start to believe that God is able, because we know he's able, but they don't know he's able yet. Maybe they haven't walked in that yet. And if they take a step forward, Satan knows he's going to lose ground. And remember, the battle is spiritual. We need to have and be willing to fight a spiritual fight. And that starts with acknowledging that I am not the one who did anything great in my life, but I have a giant in my corner. His name is God, and he is bigger than any Goliath that is out there. And when I can face him, and I can tell you what God has done to help me face him, then you can start to believe that God can help you face yours. It's so important. See, there are things that only God can do, and can I tell you this? He loves to do them. He loves it. There is nothing that makes him happier than when we go, God, like here's our perspective. God, I blew it again. I can't do it. I need you. And he's up there going, dude, I already knew you needed me. I made you to need me. That's all I needed was for you to acknowledge that you're not the God in your life. I'm the God in your life, and I am there for you, my son. That's amazing to think of. God wants it. He's excited to do it. There's stuff only God does, and God loves to do it. See, David doesn't say it was by my power, by my wisdom, and by my self-sufficiency that I took out a giant. Verse 47, he says, the Lord saves, the battle is the Lord's. See, the challenges that we face are moments in a broken world where godly faith and courage is on display. And can I just remind you of this? Believers, we need to be reminded. The cross and an empty tomb were proof, absolute proof, that no defeat was beyond the power of God. So what are we worried about? Why do we see some of our giants so big while simultaneously worshiping a God that walked out of his own grave? Let's put it in perspective. Can I tell you something that so many people believe, well, that was then and this is now? David himself, same guy that lived in this story, wrote this in Psalm 119, verse 90. God's faithfulness continues through all generations. That's us. God is still faithful. Come on, that deserves something better than that. God is still faithful, isn't he? That is so good. So step up. Go into battle. God is with you. Whatever you're facing, he is bigger. Let's pray.